Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees A Haunting in Venice, as it says here from Tony over at Deadline, hoping to scare The Nun 2. Gotta love the headlines from Tony, and we'll go ahead and talk about that. Also, we'll talk about the second weekend numbers for movies like My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3, amongst others, including The Nun 2 as well. Before any further, please make sure you smash that like button, loud that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you're subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So I am now struggling with a bit of a cold, still having some cold-like symptoms, so thank y'all again for understanding why I had to cancel my live stream the other day. And thank y'all again for y'all's thoughts and prayers. So, Haunting in Venice is expected to open to around $17.2 million, at least according to Box Office Pro, opening at around 3,200 screens. Now, what's interesting about this movie is that the premise of the film is set within the Poirot universe, which means it's supposed to be more of a mystery, of a thriller, but the way in which 20th Century Studios has been marketing this movie has been much more akin to a typical horror film. And so this film has been, again, I think very effective in its horror film marketing. The problem, it seems, is that it does not seem to actually be working, at least if these numbers are going to be accurate, because what we're seeing is that this film, costing around $60 million to make, is not looking to have that big of an opening. Now, again, when it comes to movies like this, when it comes to the horror genre, we have seen other films like The Nun, for instance, be able to have a much stronger opening than a movie like this. But it is interesting that this horror marketing might be helping it somewhat, right? Because it's making it seem like a horror film, and for all we know, it could very well be an actual horror film with the whole, seance ritual, demonic stuff that, again, I stay away from in movies typically because it's just silly. But again, it's interesting that it does not seem to be having as much of an impact helping this box office because, let's be honest, these types of movies, right, with the Poirot universe are going to much more likely appeal to an older demographic on its surface, right? When we're talking about, films that are adaptations of Agatha Christie novels, again, great novels, by the way, it seems that those novels, though, tend to be a little bit more liked or a little bit more, reaching out towards an older demographic. And so the fact that you have this older property with that older demographic in mind, but then your marketing is focusing on that younger audience that tends to show up in droves to go support horror films, we're not really seeing that play out in this way, right? Because 17.2 million is just what Box Office Pro is saying. But if you go over to the Deadline from Tony, the Deadline article from Tony, you can see right here, says the latest broad adaptation of an Agatha Christie tome looks to make around 12 million this weekend and could possibly push The Nun 2 out of number one. So here's what's interesting is that according to Deadline, they're saying that it's going to make only 12 million and that it only could push out The Nun 2, meaning that because The Nun 2 is expected to make, probably another 11 to 12 million dollars, they could have a situation where The Nun 2 ends up coming in the number one spot. Now, what's interesting is that they do have, over at the Box Office Pro, The Nun 2 listed at $11.8 million, but they do have that Haunting in Venice at 17. Now, my guess is that, again, because Box Office Pro does its own metrics, it does not typically use whatever the, industry standard is from the other so-called box office experts, but again, a lot of what they utilize in their analysis is going to be based off of social media presence. It's going to be based off of these other metrics that are a little bit harder to quantify. It's what allowed them to be correct on projecting Barbie's massive success when nobody else could really see that coming. Like as far as how massive its opening weekend was, Box Office Pro was pretty much the only one that was able to actually really predict that. But then also why they've been wrong on many other occasions. So my guess is that what they're seeing is that, hey, this film is indeed trying to appeal to that horror demographic. And so they think that probably there's going to be this higher bump based off of, compared to other typical responses to movies like this. So it's going to be interesting to see which one of these two is going to be correct, if it's going to be closer to 12, closer to 17.2. And again, this also 17.2 is the average range of this film. So the average range they have right now is 14 and 19. So even their low end at Box Office Pro is higher than what the so-called industry experts are saying are actually going to happen. So even way, either way though, whether it makes the 12 million or whether it makes the 17 or even the high end of 19, this movie is still going to be in a lot of trouble because it has a $60 million budget. Now, just as a frame of reference, when you look back to the other Poirot films that have been released, you had, The Death on the Nile, you had Murder on the Orient Express, which actually was a huge surprise to me. It was one that I actually liked a lot more than I thought that I would. And guess what? That film cost around this amount of money and was able to, make enough because, again, had positive word of mouth, was able to appeal to that older demographic audience. And sure enough, it did pretty well. Then you get to Death of the Nile, and then they boosted the budget to another 30 plus million, so like a $90 million total. And that film was not as good. The ending was terrible, and it ended up not appealing in the same way because that word of mouth wasn't nearly as strong. So because of that, this franchise amongst older demographics is already not really looking like it's all that strong based off the previous movies and based on where we are now currently with older demographics just not being as motivated to go out to see these kinds of movies, right? There have been, of course, exceptions. I think Oppenheimer is a great example of that, but you are seeing still this hesitancy to support movies like this. And the fact that they're also now trying to appeal to that younger demographic with the horror genre, to me, it's almost like they are in certain ways driving away the core audience that would otherwise be. So they're trying to get the younger audience in because they know they're showing up. The Nun 2's opening weekend was a great example of that, right? The Nun 2 opened $85.3 million worldwide in its opening. And then compare that to My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which again would have been typically appealing. I know, River. I know. Would have been appealing to the older demographic, did not open nearly as strong, nearly as well as it could have. So again, I understand why they would want to make that bet, but it doesn't look like it's going to end up paying out for them because they have to make around $150 million or more in order for them to break even. And to only open at best to $19 million based off the Box Office Pro standard, yeah, that's not going to get you there. That's not going to be enough of a start. You would have to have some very positive word of mouth. You would have to have a lot of strong momentum in order to get anywhere else. So I just personally do not think you're going to see Haunting in Venice be able to make its money back. And so that's going to be the second film, because if you go back to Death on the Nile, from what I remember, I believe that film ended up losing money. In fact, let me see if that was a film that I have on my charting. I do have that on my charting, actually. Love having the Control F feature here. So yeah, Death on the Nile only ended up making around $131 million and was around a $50+ million loss. So even though the film had an average run as far as opening weekend and first 2 weeks compared to the entirety of its run, it only made $131 million worldwide. And again, that film needed to make a lot more because it had a much higher budget, right? At that time, let's see, that film had a $90 million budget, needed to make $225 to break even, and it didn't do so, right? So compare that to the $60 million, $150. The last film didn't even get to that. So even with spending less money, it still is not likely going to hit that break-even point when even the last film with a higher budget wasn't able to do so. So the question is really going to be, how close does it get to that number? And this kind of start is just not going to be anything to write home about, and is not looking good for A Haunting in Venice. And again, I really liked the first film. I thought that it was actually a very strong film, a lot stronger than I thought it was going to be. Second film fell off a cliff a bit, especially with that ending. And this movie, again, it's appealing to that horror demographic. And so if you're a fan of horror films, maybe it'll be something for you to like. I have no interest in it, though. And so, again, maybe it's going to keep a lot more people home. Again, you're going to try to appeal to that demographic to show up, but based on these metrics, it doesn't look like they're actually showing up. It doesn't look like they're not buying it. It doesn't seem like they're buying it. And it looks like Box Office Pro, though, says that there's going to at least be some people that are going to go see it because of that horror aspect to it. This is why their number is a little bit higher than the so-called industry experts. We also have the Nun 2's numbers here, so expected to drop by 64%. This is pretty much normal, I think, for all these horror films, right? They tend to be made, Warner Brothers is pretty much, well known for being able to do this, where they make these horror films that don't cost a whole lot of money. So again, Haunting in Venice probably should have taken this route. If they were going to market it as a horror film, you should have spent horror film numbers. When you're spending $60+ million on a movie like this, and you're trying to appeal to that demographic, you got to do a little bit better than that. But The Nun 2 had a pretty good opening weekend, and this film is, again, going to be able to break even pretty easily. And hey, that's a huge win for Warner Brothers because they've had a lot of duds this year. The Equalizer 3 now going into its third week of release, seeing a 41% drop there, still at over 3,600 screens. So it's still looking, again, like it's doing okay, but still not quite going to be, it doesn't look like it's going to quite be enough for it to be able to match up to the other films of the franchise. We'll have to wait and see what those international numbers are. But again, this is seeing a pretty typical drop at this point in its release. Big Fat Greek Wedding is also, again, seeing that typical type of drop you see in its third, fourth week of release, but still not making nearly enough, $19 million total domestic, to be able to justify its existence. And I think that this franchise should have been a long time ago, but again, it is what it is. Barbie continuing to add to its overall numbers of the $4.1 million. This film is now available on PVOD, and so again, you suspect that these numbers will start to drop, but interesting, only a 28% drop, even though it is currently now available for people to be able to watch at home, so still doing quite well. And again, these numbers are not going to be enough for it to overtake the domestic totals for Maverick, but we'll have to wait and see what those international numbers are to see just how much closer it is to matching that number. Blue Beetle, also again, 27% hold, not terrible, but because it didn't have a strong start, doesn't make much of a difference. Still going to be a $100 million loss. Gran Turismo, unfortunately, is also just not doing much of anything, despite the fact that now at this point in its release, not expected to have that massive of a drop, but again, not a high number in the first place. And then we have films like Oppenheimer, Team NT as well, seeing in a similar boat. Oppenheimer, though, continuing to add to its totals. Again, going to be crossing, if not already crossing, will be soon crossing $900 million worldwide. So very, very impressive numbers there. And again, if you want to check out the charting over these numbers and to see what the most current numbers are, in fact, let me go ahead and see if I can do this for a second. So as you all know, I've got this on auto update. So again, we'll go ahead and do this live right now. So if you go ahead and, let's see, delete those, and then I go ahead and click the undo button, it should then reload those numbers, and we can see if indeed, as of yesterday, nope, still at $891 million. So it'll very soon be crossing 900 million. But these are the numbers as they currently stand. But if you want to find out more information about these numbers, go check out my website, ombreviews.com. There's a box office chart there. The top chart is one that I have to update manually. There is one that is down below, which will have these numbers right there for you. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think that Haunting in Venice is going to have a big opening? Again, for me, I would not be surprised to see it open, in that $12 to $15 million range. Don't know if it'll have that strength to get to 17, but we'll have to wait and see. But also, do you think it has any chance of breaking even? I personally don't. And also, have you seen The Nun 2? Again, I have no interest in going to see it. That's just not my cup of tea. But it's looking like that film's going to be breaking even very, very soon. And again, those are the films as they currently are. I personally, again, still recommend films like Equalizer 3 and Gran Turismo. I think that they are, again, quite solid movies. Equalizer 3, especially because it's got some beautiful shots and it's got some beautiful background, especially. I love the locations that they shot. In addition to that, you have got an awesome performance from Denzel Washington, who always gives it no matter what film he's in. And then for Gran Turismo, I just think you have a really good story, which you don't typically see in a lot of films these days. So let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you'd like to, just smash that like button, like the fire button, smash the rumble button. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.
And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members: Father Luca Illich, Laura, the Mother Major General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel by the name Eagle Rider, Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. Also to Matt317, check out his Twitch channel of the same name. Mr. Roy and ZK-Man, check him out over at xtheboundaries.co. Thank you very much for being my chosen members this month. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, also access to a podcast, access to a giveaways channel, and tons of other stuff, go check out to be a member today in the links in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.